Hey, hello everybody, Disciple here with Overwatch Curios. So we were lucky enough to visit Blizzard headquarters recently. We toured the official Overwatch museum and also got to speak directly with members from the team and learn a lot of cool stuff about the development of the game and the Overwatch world and story as a whole. We've been slowly releasing content related to our trip and the things we were able to experience, and wanted to take a look at some interesting things that have happened to the game's maps over time. And if you guys like this video, I would love it if you could drop a like, since it actually helps us so much, since YouTube isn't exactly looking out for its creators. Now, much like heroes, the abilities they use, or even just balance changes we see being made, every map goes through tons of iterations before Blizzard finally grants a map their stamp of approval for release. We got to see and talk about some of the early designs behind some of Overwatch's oldest and most iconic maps, and today we'll take a look at some interesting concepts and features that ended up being removed from the game. Now, the first map we get to take a look at is Dorado, which was the second payload map added to the game. We got to see several pieces of early concept art, and the city displayed was wildly different from the one that we see in the game today. The first two screenshots show a more modernized version of what Dorado ended up becoming. The first picture shows off the ziggurat from the current version, and while the level's layout looks similar, after all we still see high ground on both sides of the space prior to entering, the surrounding architecture is much more modernized. We see lit skyrise housing as well as neon lights for a business of some sort. There's also very urban landscaping around, with many more bushes and shrubs around the sides of the buildings. The initial version of Dorado shows the city in a more civilized state than it's in currently, and right now there's definitely disparity between the village and of course the massive technological ziggurat. In this other screenshot, we see what looks to be the start of the map for the attacking team. Instead of the classic Adobe style homes from in-game today, instead the streets are lined with storefronts, neon lights, and probably the best near future lowrider of all time. If only this car had been the payload instead, then maybe my teammates would actually push it. Now, while the general art style for the map had changed drastically since its initial form, it's quite literally what lies beneath the surface that completely changed the gameplay of Dorado. The initial designs for the map featured a much larger underground space, with tunnels and buildings carving away beneath the first half of the map. However, after testing, Blizzard felt like all the additional space underground made the map too large and too confusing for players and distracted from the objective of the game, and decided to remove all but a fraction of the underground segment in the final release of Dorado that we all know today. There's obviously the tunnel to the left as you come out of the attacker's spawn, and there's actually a few tunnels as well under the final point, but there was so much more that was in the game at one point, and that maybe could have been. Now, Nepal's Sanctum is known for its aggressive teamfight positioning and map hazards as well. At the top of a mountain, the Sanctum is surrounded by heights, and in the middle features a very large pit between the two primary paths from each base. Heroes such as Lucio, Orisa, and Roadhog are extremely powerful picks here for their ability to displace characters and secure environmental kills, while otherwise across the map teamfights are focused on close quarters combat with small spaces to maneuver. Now, the original concept for Sanctum was ironically very similar to the map we have today. The concept art from 2015 shows that the map was largely unchanged except for one huge difference: the shattered globe floating directly on the middle of the control point. Now, it's unclear what purpose this hologram could have meant in terms of lore, but it definitely added an entire new element to combat over the control point. This large projection creates an extreme amount of visual clutter around the objective, and as so would make it even more difficult to aim at enemy targets on the point, and would further obscure the visual indicators from things like enemy abilities. As a result, Blizzard ended up removing this piece from the final version of the map. However, it did add another layer of depth to the lore behind the importance of Nepal for the monks, and it's really cool to see this image in retrospect at least. Now, Lijiang Tower was, along with Nepal and Ilios, one of the first control maps for Overwatch's brand new mode. The tower itself is located in China and is host to some of the world's most state-of-the-art space stations. The company that owns the tower itself is most known for its development of the Horizon lunar colony, the origin of Winston, and now the newest addition to the pool of available assault maps. While Lijiang Tower's control center is the heart of a space corporation, the initial design for the map was actually very different. Early images show the control center with a much more confined space. The ceiling is lower, and the playable space around the control point is also much smaller. The surrounding area features two staircases, one from each spawn point, that wind their way up to a higher platform overlooking the control point itself. In terms of gameplay, the much more confined control point provided much more opportunity for high impact damage heroes such as Reaper or Junkrat to shine. The lack of cover meant that there was little place to hide for any team attempting to defend a control point, unlike what we have today. The high ground was also much more accessible for players, making it a much stronger point of contention. Control of the high ground would give the winning team a distinct advantage in maintaining control, and with the point of access being a walled-in staircase, maintaining that control would be a matter of zoning and area damage or denial. The current high ground on Control Center requires a pretty lengthy trip up a staircase to a side, and due to its limited spacing and the amount of time it takes to travel to the top, it's pretty rare to see this space utilized effectively or frequently by high-level players or competitive teams, and it's really something that a Pharah will pop up to or a Soldier 76 with this ultimate will utilize from time to time. Now also at the center of the control point is what looks like a large docking station, as the text on the hologram states shuttle docking is in progress. A large device in the middle obstructs view of the control point from the bottom front, but also looks like another accessible high ground for heroes like Junkrat, Reaper, Pharah, or Winston to lie in wait for enemies to attack. Now, while these early concepts are very cool, I also feel like the Lijiang Tower we have today is fairly balanced, and so I'm happy that the team reached a final state that they could all agree on. Now, Hanamura is one of the oldest maps in the game, and was one of the first showcased even prior to the beta of the game. However, its earliest design varied quite a bit from the one that we see today. The original concept of Hanamura drew a very linear path for the attackers straight to the temple. In this image, we see a modern cityscape much like the first point, with a street lined with shops and vendors on both sides. However, in the background you can clearly see the temple straight ahead. The shops on either side, as well as the mechs, serve as small coverage areas for the attacking team leading up to the control point. However, with no obvious flank routes, this early Hanamura would have played much like the Streets phase of King's Row, with teams relying purely on counterpicks and raw skill to win a fight, as opposed to controlling any high ground or having various flank routes to consider for engaging. The choke point here would have been even more difficult to breach than it is currently. The attackers have very little coverage, meaning that spam would be king. Not only that, but the long line of sights open up play for heroes like Widowmaker to completely carry a match. In the end, additional buildings and a second route will be added, in addition to the top window, which also leads to a side flank directly to the point, opening up multiple avenues of access for the attacking team to breach this front gate. Now, from Japan all the way back to my home state of Arizona, we get to take a look at the first design of Route 66. Early versions of the map had a much more desolate feel, with the street itself being broken down and weathered heavily by either traffic or neglect. Big Earls is still the focal point for the first checkpoint, but the large billboard to the side is missing, which opens up the map in a really unfair way for the attacking team. With no low ground coverage outside of Big Earls itself, defending teams would be forced to either hold the top of the station or face the threat of aggressive snipers and other long-range heroes applying pressure from pretty relative safety. This is exacerbated by the lack of the ridge to the left side, which in today's version of the map provides defensive players a secondary high ground source after the payload makes its first bend around the map. In the end, Blizzard had to add additional high cover and high ground opportunities for defenders, but the aesthetic of the lone gas station along an abandoned highway is pretty awesome to take a look back on, and we still get that same feeling when we play the map today. Now, getting the opportunity to take a look back at these maps and see all of the changes that have been made over time is really interesting for us, and having the opportunity to share some of these changes and give insight into the development of the maps and what we have today is a blast for us. Since Blizzard loves to pay respects to these early concepts through hero skins, sprays, and the like, maybe one day we could see some of these old versions of the map added as alternate maps for different game modes or some sort of event, or maybe even if we got custom map editing, the community could create some of these throwbacks. Now, if that were to happen, which of these classic designs did you find the most interesting and would like to see in the game the most to try out? Well, let us know in the comments below because I love hearing from all you guys. And of course, while you're down there, consider subscribing to the channel so you can keep up to date with all of our newest content, especially when we reveal the rest of our trip to Blizzard and the things we learned there. Now, until next time, thanks so much for watching, I love you guys, and I can't wait to see you again. Peace.